But my life would be so sublime if I bought a robot girl online. My robot girlfriend. The best relationship I'd ever be in.
R is for Rape, Part 4, Valley of the Dolls. I know. I said I'd write 3 posts on R is for Rape, focusing on issues of consent rather than cut and dry forcible rape. But there's just so much juicy stuff here, and I couldn't help myself. At this point, I'm mulling over a 5th and final one, but I need to rewatch a film I saw way back when I was about 19 or 20 in order to see if my recollections are accurate and relevant to the topic. Anyhow, in this post, I plan to talk about a moral quagmire that only exists because males exist. Oh, for fuck's sake, what moral dilemmas aren't the result of men and their insistence that their privileges and perversions are actually rights? I'm going to kick things off by asking you to consider something. Have you ever done violence to a machine malfunctioning in your life? You know, you get a flat tire on your bike or car, and you kick it as you now are going to be late for an appointment. Or your computer fan starts making a weird noise, so you bang it a bit to shake loose any dust or to jolt any loose mechanisms back into place. And after some initial satisfaction gleaned from a moment of frustration and anger, did you later feel bad, thinking to yourself, shit, it's not my car or computer's fault. Why did I have to act out that way? How would I feel if someone knocked me about if I didn't perform correctly? Likely, if you have abused one of the machines in your life, you never gave it a second thought afterwards. It's a machine after all. We own them and they exist at our pleasure. We can trade them in or even discard them in the nearest toxic earth-killing landfill if they stop working or we want a newer, better model, right? But do our feelings and actions change as our machines become more intuitive or integral to our lives? We've entered a stage in technological development where inventors dream of designing machines that will approach and even surpass human intelligence and capability, ready to serve our every need and protect us from dangerous, strenuous, and/or boring work. But what will be our relationships to them? What will be their various purposes? I think the answers to these questions will be very different for males and females. We are, after all, very different creatures biologically and socially, and as a result, intellectually and ethically. It is a well-observed and even documented fact that males are more violent, more emotionally volatile, more illogical in their thinking and actions, and have behaviors that are much more dangerous to the earth and to society in general, and particularly women and girls, than females are and have. Men try to argue that this is not true, and predictably, blame and responsibility are the only things they're willing to share with women, but the proof is in observation, anecdote, and collected data across time and place. And remember, single aberrant cases do not negate large-scale truths. Propensity for dominating, controlling, and doing violence is vastly different depending on biological sex in general. The same is true of our creative endeavors. So much of male creation or invention is rooted in violence and domination. Think of how much of what is attributed to males comes out of trying to create weapons, trying to control various groups of people, or trying to satisfy male sexual perversions through harming women, but dressing it up as a basic human male right. Even when males steal ideas and inventions from women, they inevitably transform them into something beneficial to the violent male nature and harmful to females as a class. There are millions of examples. You just need to open your eyes and look around you. Humans have been designing and implementing machines and technology for thousands of years. For most of this period, inventions have been simple but life-changing, but we've only fairly recently entered a period of accelerated development. And with that development have come ethical debates. Personally, I think those debates have only come about with the allowance of women into the public intellectual forum, as women as a rule tend to think more about the impact of actions and processes on life, and to question the value in what is called progress, while males tend to be motivated by recognition and wealth accumulation and don't seem to be bothered by progress at any cost mentality. Valley of the Sex Dolls. The latest multidisciplinary realm of tech-related ethical debates is that of AI, or artificial intelligence, and robotics. It seemed logical following human periods of intense agricultural labor and then later the Industrial Revolution, both periods involving heavy and dangerous workloads, especially for the poor, and plenty of injury and death because of survival, public demand, and competition to meet that demand. Given that we likely won't slide back technologically unless there's some kind of extinction-level event, AI and robots seem like a good idea to take on dangerous and repetitive tasks. This is a whole separate and massive topic that I'm not going to dive down into in this article. What I want to talk about is the fact that in the hands of men, all technology ends up being used for other purposes that have nothing to do with making life better for humankind. And with regard to AI and robots, I'm talking about the sex industry, of course. Now, I was a kid in the 1970s and 80s, and we all sort of knew about blow-up sex dolls. Not that we'd ever seen one or totally understood why this kind of thing might be appealing, but somehow kids always find out about the shit that males claim they need to exist. To this day, I've never seen one of those simplistic man toys in person, although I've been to a few sex shops out of morbid curiosity, where I've seen slightly more sophisticated and expensive items that men like to stick their dicks in, like severed female pelvises with fillable holes. Sexy shit, man. I also remember sometime in adulthood, maybe when I was living in Taiwan, hearing about a bunch of Chinese teenage boys who got together to buy a plastic sex doll and it ended up spreading syphilis or something equally gross to each other after failing to clean their shared plastic girlfriend's holes. But we live in an advanced age now, damn it, and blow-up dolls seem so crude and cold, and require too much work to inflate besides. We've managed to develop very lifelike sex dolls and even sex robots, or sex androids might be the more accurate term, that can talk and are warm to the touch. And it's very difficult to imagine that in the not-too-distant future, AI will develop enough to convince males that they're dealing with a real live human female. Until she rips his dick off with superhuman strength, that is. Just joking. I'll get into this a little bit later. There's been a surge in the openings of sex doll brothels around the world. Canada, Russia, all over Europe, Japan, and plenty more. The demand is definitely there, even in countries that ban imports of sex dolls or that make prostitution illegal. And somehow I don't think the interest is just a simple interest in a novel experience. If that were true, we wouldn't be seeing a surge in the purchase of private units as well. While there may be several reasons for males' vacant inner lives venturing into this new territory of sexual depravity, I think there is an overwhelming underlying reason. In an age where men have to worry a little bit about the legal system, unlike for most of human history, they want to be able to do whatever the fuck they want to a female body without having to worry about consent or any kind of repercussions. In other words, they want to have a rape experience, otherwise known as heterosexual intercourse, without it ever becoming an issue to defend against, let alone think about in an ethical way. What about advanced AI androids and superintelligences? In the written post, I've made a little flow chart showing a possible convergence between humans and machines, and if you head on over there, you can click on the pic to enlarge it and have a look. Okay, so on the human side of things, I list general groupings of humans in order from highest value to lowest value. And on the machine side of things, I list technology in order from most simplistic to most complex. And perhaps their value to human society also increases with advanced capability. The nature of patriarchy or male dominated society is hierarchy. There's no such thing as equality. Males, of course, sit at the top. I've talked about female hierarchy in past posts, noting that females who fulfill their dick-sucking and breeding duties are the most highly valued. And I've noticed that at the bottom are both prostitutes and lesbians. It's really hard to say which is valued the least. In some cultures, lesbians can be both imprisoned and put to death legally, whereas prostitutes may just be jailed. Perhaps this is just because prostitutes are of more use and value to males, while lesbians provide men with nothing except a target for hate and blame. Regarding machines, I argue that as technology approaches some kind of human intelligence, it is valued more by male society. So my question becomes thus: if a prostitute faces off against a super intelligent android, who wins? Well, let's think about superintelligence and the future of AI and whether one of these entities can fool humans or replace humans completely. I'm not going to go crazily in depth on this topic as it has been discussed to death everywhere, and there are so many academic theories on what constitutes artificial intelligence and the defining features of consciousness. But I'll say a few words with regard to rights and consent, as that is the issue here. Very basically, to be conscious means to be self-aware. It involves having emotions, independent subjective thoughts, desires, inspiration, and wisdom. At a more advanced level, it means to be able to understand motives and intent and to adapt and respond accordingly. And it means to be able to experience empathy. At the most advanced level of consciousness, an entity surpasses human intelligence and can override human programming to serve its own needs. Many believe that AI will never reach this state, but one never knows. Currently, our technology can make decisions and predictions based on data and do difficult computations and classifications, but that is not human-level consciousness. So, if an entity is not technically conscious, is it deserving of rights? At what point would a machine be deserving of workers or just existential rights in the way that humans are supposed to be? And in the case of a technically conscious sex robot, would she require the protection that consent pretends to offer to human females? And more importantly, would she be able to override her programming that causes her to allow males to rape her by default in order to consent to that rape on a case-by-case basis? Are these ethical issues worth thinking about, or do sex robots solve anything for women? The ethicality of sex robots and what they mean for womankind is a frequently debated topic. And of course, nothing ever gets solved, much in the same way that debates on whether prostitution should be legalized hasn't solved anything for women in the big picture either. One side argues that sex robots increases the dehumanization of females and leads to more sex-based violence and disrespect, and the other side argues that sex robots rescue women from having to work in prostitution, thus saving female lives and decreasing suffering. Some idiots even argue that sex robots provide an opportunity to teach males about consent, like males give a shit about how they treat women. No, the problem is that when debating issues that pertain to global female well-being, Almost no one understands or is willing to admit they understand the true underlying issue. The underlying issue isn't male miseducation or poor definitions of consent or sex crimes or making prostitution legal. The underlying problem is males themselves. They are weaponized humans with both an inbuilt drive to dominate and commit violence and an easily learned feeling of deservedness when it comes to their freedom and behavior and how others should treat them. They universally enact double standards when it comes to dealing with females and don't see a problem with it. Until you solve the problem of male existence, meaning you eliminate them altogether, you reduce their population to about 5% of the total, and or you control their movements through a system of surveillance, women and girls will always suffer the consequences of male existence because males run the world in a way that benefits them and causes degradation, poverty, and suffering for females. So any debate about what males create or do that causes problems for the world is all a bit silly because you can't solve it. Unless you name the real problem, you solve nothing. Sex robots or no sex robots, you solve nothing for females. One final note. Retaliation. What if they turn against us? You'll notice that this is always a question that men ask when talking about other groups, racial or ethnic groups that they have enslaved in the past, aliens coming to our planet from outer space, and now AIs and superintelligences. You never hear women voice concerns about this. Why? Well, males are generally unable to see things from others' perspectives because they are the entitled predator class, and predators' automatic behavior is to see all others as threats and to neutralize them through assault, enslavement, abuse, and destruction. They justify this by telling themselves and the world that if they didn't do it, then they themselves would be destroyed. We've all been at the receiving end of soldiers and veterans, and I've witnessed this many, many times in the US, who attack their critics by telling them that if not for soldiers and the shit they do, we'd all be victimized and lose our freedom. But soldiers are specialized predators, and they and males in general can only foresee that another group would seek to act as predators too, even if there is no evidence to support that motivation. Interestingly but unsurprisingly, men are more hysterical about robot retaliation than they are about female retaliation. Of course, you get a segment of the male population obsessed with supposed female power, envisioning being kept on farms and having their sperm harvested by angry lesbians in the near future, complaining about the rapid onset of the pussification of society, and even believing that matriarchy is a done deal. Females already ruling the world in all systems supporting female power. Laughable, of course, as this is clearly a simple and infantile example of the Freudian defense mechanism projection. All men know on some level that they are the oppressors. In fact, women have never risen en masse against men, despite millennia of being treated as prey and even slaves, including repeated and documented atrocities against them and the widespread suffering that still exists, but that is written off as separate, one-off experiences that have nothing to do with males as a dangerous predator class. In fact, still today, the vast majority of women have been successfully programmed to seek out, accept, and even enjoy their addiction-driven and fear-based subservience to men, and thus have no power as a class. The few women who do speak out or rebel are quickly destroyed in a variety of ways, even by fellow females, so they pose no threat. At the end of the day, the average male sees future female retaliation in about the same way that he fears retaliation from, say, his refrigerator. Women are not predators, but controlled things, in other words. Rather, average males, in addition to the hysterical ones mentioned above, are far more worried about losing control of robots, specifically those with AI capabilities that allow them to learn beyond their programming. It's interesting. All males with these kinds of persecution complexes tend to be those who know on some level that they deserve punishment for the evils they have done in their lives. Despite many women's willing ignorance, we are all extremely aware of how much violence is done to women by males. The data are there for all to see. We also know that consuming violent pornography is linked with greater violence against women. And men also know that women won't retaliate. But data are coming in regarding male violence done to female sex dolls and robots. Around the world are examples of violence, including molestation, mutilation, and decapitation. Males might try to write this off as fantasy at this point, just as they do in their writing, stand-up comedy, television, and films. But there will come a day where sex robots will become advanced enough to have rights and perhaps the right to give and withhold consent. But I think that is part of the male hysteria about robot retaliation. Human women won't do it, but maybe sex robots will.
I wanna thank you upon your silver skin. Robot, don't care where I've been. You gotta choose it, you use it, so let me plug it in. Robots are my next of kin.